Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. Mishnah Yomi is continuing in the first parak of Challah. Today we're learning Daled and Hey, 4 and 5. Yesterday, in Gimel, we mentioned things that are chayiv in Challah, but pater from Meiser. Now we're actually seeing the opposite in Mishnah number 4. Elo chayavin b'Meiserot u'paturin min Challah. These items are chayiv in Meiser, in tithing, but they're pater from Challah. We're about to see why. Ha'oriz, that's rice. Dochan, millet. Haprogim, poppy. Shumshamin, sesame. V'kitniot, legumes, the famous kitniot of Pesach fame. Now, these items are commonly ground up into flour, and even if you grind it into flour and make some kind of bread with it, it's not halachically actually really bread, so it's not chayiv in challah, because challah, the pasuk, the Torah calls lechem. And even though these are kind of like bread, it's nishta really bread. In the Gemara, they discuss that these items don't really ferment and rise and leaven in the same way that normal grains and normal bread do, so they're not really bread. The Mishnah continues with another exemption, upahot mechameshet revayim batvua. And even in the tvua, the 5 grains we learned in Mishnah Aleph, if it's less than 5 revayim, so it's a reva is a fourth of a kav, so it means 5/4 of a kav. So a kav and a fourth, less than this amount. It's really dough, and it's really from the right species, but it's not the right amount. We're going to talk more about this in the second parak in the 6th Mishnah. There's a discussion there, but I mean, you consult your local posek. The minhag is if you're making 5-pound bag of flour, that you certainly separate challah with a bracha. To separate without a bracha, maybe a 3 pounds is enough. For Sfardim, it could be even a little less. You can make a bracha, except for the Ben Ish Chai, he needs a little more than 5 pounds. Okay, there's a number of shitot, but in general, the minhag is to separate with a bracha if you have a 5-pound bag of flour. But again, consult your local Orthodox posek for your local minhag. So even if you have the right species, but less than the required amount, you do not separate challah, but of course there's meiser. The Mishnah continues, Hasufganin. Sufganin is a spongy kind of dough. Now you've heard of sufganiyot. Sufganiyot is our famous Hanukkah donuts. So that word comes from this word. Sufganin is a thin dough, like imagine like a pancake batter or like a sponge cake kind of thing. The Bartner here explains it's either lechem, shablilato rocha. It's a very thin and watery consistency in the dough. So it's like a svug, it ends up like a sponge cake. Or there's another parish, rikikin dokin, like thin wafer-like dough. Like the phyllo dough they use for pastries and things like this. This is a whole discussion when we get into pata baba kisnin. That's a whole other sugya of when is bread not really bread. And this Mishnah is one of the sources of that. And then the Mishnah continues, haduvshonin, honey dough. Barnur says either it's mitgonin b'dvash, it's fried up in honey, sounds delicious, or it's nilushin b'dvash, you've mixed honey or something sweet into the dough itself. That's not a real bread anymore. Iskritin. Iskritin is wafers, again made from a thin dough into a thin kind of thing that's not bread. Cholata masret, or mashret, is dough of soaking, or it's dough made by pouring hot water on top of the dough, and that's how you cook it. Hameduma. Now, the meduma is mixed truma and chulin. And truma itself is exempt from challah. And now meduma is treated as truma, but on a rabbinical level. So bisman hazeh, when the challah also is a rabbinical level, so it doesn't, the obligation of challah doesn't cancel out the rabbinical requirement to take challah even on meduma. So it's listed in the Mishnah. So these are Peturin min hachallah. Now Mishnah Hay explains a bit of a wrinkle on the sufganin, the thin dough or the wafer-like, thin, hard kind of bread that we're talking about. Isa shetchilata sufganin v'sofa sufganin. Patura min challah. So when is it patur from taking challah? When it's sufganin at the beginning and the end, meaning it's a thin, watery dough that's sort of more of a batter. Like you imagine like a thin pancake batter, and you're also cooking it up like pancakes. You're frying it up. You're not baking it in the oven like bread is normally baked. However, the Mishnah continues, Tchilota isa v'sofa sufganin. If at the beginning it's isa, it's regular dough, like bread dough, nice thick bread dough, v'sofa sifganin, and then you cook it like sifganin, meaning you fry it up, or you're cooking it in water. You're not baking it in the oven like normal bread. Or the Mishnah brings the case of tchilatos sifganin sofa isa. If you start off with a thin batter, but you end up baking it in the oven like a regular dough, and all the water evaporates, it ends up something like bread. Chayevis b'challah. These things are chayev in challah because at some point they were bread-like. Either the original isa, the dough, is bread-like, or the manner of baking it is bread-like. So it counts as bread for the obligation of challah. And the Mishnah concludes, V'chen hanuvkaot chayavot. And nuvkaot are also chayev in challah. Bartner explains, what is that? They would take already made bread, grind it back up into solets, and apparently mix it with water to make machal litinoko, to make baby food. So baby food was made of crushed up bread, crushed very fine, and mixed up with liquid again to spoon feed it to the babies. And this was also chayiv in challah because originally it was bread. And this reminds us of the sugya of bread crumbs. What bracha are bread crumbs? Well, it depends. If originally it was mamish bread, a loaf of bread, then even though they are cut up and made into bread crumbs, it's still hamotzi. However, if this product was actually originally made to become bread crumbs, not a real loaf of actual bread, then many poskim say it would be mizonot. Shkoyach Rabosai, Shabbat Shalom, Good Shabbos, Ksiva Simatova, and all the good stuff.